You're watching Between the Lines with your host, Dan Gray.
Good evening and welcome to another jam-packed version of Between the Lines. I'm your host, Dan Gray. I started this evening talking to an individual about the $6.4 billion COVID contingency fund the province of Ontario has. Here's the story. I'm with David MacDonald from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. He wrote a study, I guess is the best way to say it, comparing COVID spending from a federal and provincial level. Thank you for joining me, David.
Thanks for having me.
One of the things that popped out at me immediately when I saw the study was how much the federal government has spent, like even against its own GDP, which is amazing. So you want to go on about how you figured out these numbers for us?
Sure. So in order to put this together, what I did is I went through the federal as well as all of the provincial budgets, fiscal updates, press releases, any official communications I could get my hand on to basically create a list for each one of the provinces as well as the federal government of what their COVID-19 plans were. And this could include anything, they said, as part of their COVID-19 plan. Some of the provinces had corporate tax cuts as part of their COVID-19 plan. Some of them had big infrastructure spending. You know, plenty of them had increases in healthcare costs or PPE purchases, that sort of thing. Basically, anything they said was COVID-19 related, I accepted as such. And now from that, once we've got that, I pulled out all the liquidity measures where you're kind of giving loans, and I pulled out the unallocated funds where it wasn't clear where the money was going, and focused just on direct measures. So like just, you know, that they're actually spending on a program and they have a cost estimate for it. And so in total, federal and provincial governments planning to spend $374 billion on COVID-19 direct measures. 92% of that federal money, 8% of that provincial money. So really almost entirely a federal affair in terms of what this is paying for, largely because of the big federal measures on business and individual supports, things like the wage subsidy or the CERB and the changes to EI. But even on the healthcare front, most of the healthcare funding is also federal, in that they're the ones buying the vaccines, and they're also the ones making big transfers to the provinces. The provinces are adding some money on top, but ultimately most of the money is still federal.
So when we talk $396 billion on a federal amount, compared to what Canada has in a GDP, that's fairly significant, correct?
Yeah, so the 374 is both levels of government, both federal and provincial. So this is sort of the total tab as it is at this point. And yeah, it's a huge commitment. You know, we're talking over $10,000 a person in the country. You know, every man, woman, child. You know, over $10,000 a person. And the federal supports differ depending on which province you're in, based on sort of which programs are being accessed. So Alberta is actually receiving the most federal support on a per person basis. They're actually receiving almost $1,000 more than actually more than $1,000, $1,200 more than the next highest province, which is actually Ontario. Ontario is actually receiving the second highest federal supports on a per capita basis.
And when we're talking Ontario on a per capita basis, and I know you said somewhere north of $9,000 per person.
Oh yes, I mean in terms of the total amount that's being spent in Ontario, it's actually more than that. But if we do it on a GDP basis too, so we can kind of compare the provinces, because some provinces are bigger, but they have bigger economies, and so you know Ontario is sort of at the low end of the range of spending in the big provinces, spending about 1% of GDP, similar to what Alberta is spending, actually about 1% of GDP. Quebec is in the middle, spending about 1.5%. And then BC is actually spending the most at 3% of GDP. What that means is that BC is spending 3 times more than Ontario is once you adjust for the size of their economies.
Okay, so given that, and we're getting into, like, I read parts about contingency funds, and I know Ontario isn't the only province that has that contingency funds, but I think when I was reading, it was one of the biggest. Want to tell me a little bit about that? What seemingly is money that is unspent by the provincial government right now?
Yeah, so several of the in fact, 6 out of 10 provinces are maintaining some sort of unallocated funds. So these funds are built in the budget, so they're counting as an expenditure. They count against the deficit. they're sort of there, but they're not for anything in particular. They just sort of have a COVID-19 label on them, but they're not for buying PPE, or they're not for, supporting jobless Canadians or something like that. But they are in the budgets. Now, Ontario has the biggest one of these unallocated funds at $6.4 billion. It's quite a substantial fund. 2.4 of that 6.4 is from a contingency fund that's allocated till the end of this year. And so hopefully they'll spend that money, but at present it's not for anything in particular. One of the big expenditures they haven't costed yet, but would likely eat into this contingency fund in Ontario, is the new business grant support program that was announced in December. Now, there isn't any costing on that. But so we got this 2.4 that's with us right now on the books. And then on April 1st, there's another $4 billion in contingency funds that will come into play. It's called the Pandemic Fund. And so my report looks at anything that's allocated from 2019 through 2022. And so you get the total amount of $6.4 billion in unallocated funds in Ontario budgets.
And basically speaking, they could spend that on literally anything, whether it be long-term care or extra health care or policing, or pick one to help pick up some of the slack from municipalities. That's kind of the way this looks right now?
Yeah, that's right. It's just a big open-ended fund that could be used for anything that comes up and the government wants to spend money on. They spend this money without increasing the size of the deficit because it's already built into the budget. So it's already counted against the deficit. And if they don't spend it, the money just disappears. So the money just goes back, the deficit becomes slightly smaller, the money disappears at the end of the fiscal year, and it's gone. And so you can imagine that, since we're all locked in our houses, we can't go outside for anything but essential purposes. This is sort of a rainy day fund, except there's a hurricane outside and the roof just got pulled off. I mean, now is the time to spend the rainy day fund on things that we need, like, an iron ring around long-term care, or rapid testing in congregate workplaces. I mean, there's clearly a lot of need out there, and the government of Ontario has built a lot into their budgets, and they're not using it. And so that's one of the things I wanted to point out with this report. Ontario's been pretty good in terms of matching federal funding, in terms of allocating money that they've got from the federal government, and having plans in place to fully access additional federal funds. Not the case necessarily across the board in other provinces. A lot of provinces really dropping the ball there. Ontario's been pretty good on that front in terms of accessing most of the federal money that they can. But this is certainly one of the areas where other provinces have contingency funds, but nowhere near the size of Ontario's.
So could the federal government, once this becomes 6.4 and it doesn't seem to be allocated, I know we just discussed that it could just disappear and the deficit goes away. Could the federal government ask for some of their funds back from the province, or would that be a possibility?
No, this is purely a provincial fund. So it has nothing to do with the federal transfers. The federal transfers, as far as I can tell, most of them have actually been spent, and the province has accessed not all, but much of the federal money that it could access, Ontario in particular. This is a purely provincial creation. So not all provinces have a contingency fund. British Columbia, for instance, had one worth $1.5 billion, but they spent it in the fall. They allocated it to things. That hasn't been the case yet in Ontario, but it's purely provincial. So the feds don't really have, it's not federal money, it's purely provincial money that's built into this fund.
So basically in the end, this is provincial money that they've said is going to, just to sum it up, could be spent for COVID, has been allocated and earmarked for COVID, but if we don't need it, then it just sort of, it'll be for something else, or we just don't have a deficit. That pretty much sum up that section of those contingencies? That's
exactly right. It's a hedge. So if things are worse, they can use it. If things aren't worse, the deficit gets smaller and maybe that looks slightly better. Clearly the argument in the report is that we actually need it. This is a lot of money. We need this money now. Let's not let it lapse and therefore not address these key problems with the pandemic.
Well, thank you for joining me, David. And we will hopefully speak with you in the future about other stuff that your alternatives are putting out.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me.
Have yourself a great day.
Bye now.
$6.4 billion is a lot of money. Here's hoping the province knows where they're going to spend it shortly. We'll be back after this message. The third segment of Between the Lines this week is brought to you by two of my co-journalists, Jacob Moore and Colette Linden. They did individual stories on mental health, one in sports and one with an Addictions and Mental Health Association in Sault Ste. Marie. I hope you enjoy these little clips.
throughout this week to spread the word and effort to raise awareness. I'm really privileged to be here today with RJ Renner and Libertine Wilson, who are representing addiction and mental health advocates, an AAMHA member. Good morning, guys. How are you today?
Fabulous. For you.
I'm very well. Thank you very much for being here. I think what you guys are doing is phenomenal. I did mention to you earlier that I found this on Facebook in one of the groups that I'm involved with, and we're both in the same group. So I just want to applaud your efforts in raising awareness. But if you could just take a moment and explain to me what addiction and mental health advocates do and what they do when they collect these life experiences that you have called out for.
Addictions and mental health aims to bring awareness to the issues and those that suffer in our community. We offer peer support group meetings once a week, and our goal is to educate and bring more awareness to those issues in our community. Okay,
great. So when did you first put out this announcement that you'd want people to come back to you and bring their stories to you? Have you received a lot of feedback?
So the initial call from AAMHA went out on October 27th, I believe.
Oh, okay.
27th. So we've been collecting letters since then, and our team, action casting, hard to convey that message in different fashion to our community.
Okay, and so you deal with addiction, mental health, suicide, homelessness, and everything. Like that's a lot that you're dealing with. So tell me a little bit more about your association and what you guys do on a daily basis, and how you offer and provide help or resources to those who reach out to you.
So AMHA has done a lot of things since it's been running in its last year. We've held a suicide awareness event, held an overdose awareness event, it Coach for Cause, started actions in our community, one for mental health, for a stage 3 withdrawal facility to be held in our community. What else have we done?
Okay, great. So again, I just wanted to thank you, but if you could just let me know how big is your association? Do you have members? How many members? Just tell me a little bit about the people you serve.
Well, we serve the entire city, right? That's the objective.
Okay.
Many people come to the table. Some find what they need and go about merry way, if you will. Others struggle a little bit harder, so they, keep coming back.
Okay. So if someone wanted to reach out to you guys, because I think this is a really important part, how do they do that? How can they contact you?
So we have a public page on Facebook, which anyone is free to click and join there.
Okay.
We have a business page for members to be able to communicate with each other.
Okay.
In regards to the activities that we have ongoing in our community.
Okay, great.
So I just wanted to dive in today to talk about today being Bell Let's Talk Day and Mental Health Week. I want to dive into how has it been doing wellness checks with athletes and such during the COVID-19?
So like you said, I work with lots of different athletes in town, and mainly it has been different in terms of the way I provide support. It used to be in person, and now we're having to do phone calls and Zoom meetings, which isn't ideal, but it's what we have. Basically, we're just trying to remind them that there are supports available, and if they do need to talk or get some help or support, that we're here. So still sending reminders out, still having some team Zoom meetings just to check in with them and find out how everybody's doing.
And how are you finding doing things over Zoom or phone calls versus in person? Is that a challenge for people right now?
Well, I think it depends on how you like to communicate. For some people, they really enjoy it. They don't have to leave their house. And for For some people, they're used to the technology and so they enjoy it. For myself and a lot of service providers, our preference certainly is to be in person with someone to chat with them. But for safety concerns, it's just not something that we can do right now. But I'm hoping that in the near future that will start to change as things start to open up.
We're out of time for today. I want to thank you so much for coming in and doing this interview, especially at a time like this where people's mental health may not be as strong as it was before during COVID-19, and especially during Bell Let's Talk Week, to just remind people we need to talk to each other and still feel like we're a part of a community.
Absolutely. You said it very well.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and we'll be right back right after this.
And that's it. That's the show for this week. It's pretty much been jam-packed. We covered a lot of different topics. Please come back next week at 7 o'clock on Thursdays for Between the Lines. I'm your host, Dan Gray. The second segment of tonight's show has a conversation taken a couple of weeks ago with Mayor Don Gary talking about a snowplow in purchase, among other things, on the Michigan side of the border. Again, this was taken a couple of weeks ago, so the ski hill or the snow hill that we talk about in this interview is now open. But other than that, here's our takeaway. Good morning, everybody. I'm with Mayor Don Gary from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Thanks for joining me today, Don. We're a little bit separated right now with that bridge closer and everything else. It's nice to see you one-on-one from covering your council meetings and things, but I've been getting a little bit of feedback here, and we'll get back to the snowblower here shortly, but we'll what is it about the carbide dock? What are they doing up that way?
Yeah, good morning, Dan. Well, the carbide dock has always been a critical spot for us because it's the only deep water port that we have on the U.S. side that's east of Marquette, Michigan, and I don't know where down south below the bridge. So if any ships had any issues, they would pull there. We also used to dock the new passenger liners that come up there. And then we had a fantastic park there with a nice railing where people, adults and kids could come and fish. So it's always been a highlight of the area. One of the things that we get criticized for over here is that we don't have enough usable waterfront space. Everybody loves the walkway, the boardwalk on your side, and would like more of that on our side. So when this, started to fail and we had to rope it off, of course, we started looking for any type of financing we could find, and finally did. So it's a phenomenal project. It's going to be a great asset to the city of Sault Ste. Marie.
So is the city paying for any of that? I read the feds in the state. You think it's all fed and state, isn't it?
It's all fed and state money, which is beautiful. And it took us a couple of shots to try to get the federal money. It came through a U.S. Department of Transportation grant. And we also got some MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation from Michigan, and then some Michigan Department of Transportation money too. Because that is in actuality part of the state roadway system, technically, because ships could dock there and they can unload there.
It's a national infrastructure thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then also in conjunction with that project, we're redoing the state trunk line, which is Easterday Avenue, that goes from that site and then goes up to Ashman. So that is actually a truck route. So those will be done in conjunction with each other. So part of our that was going to be one of my other things that I saw come up on that agenda on Monday was a bunch of roundabouts on Easter Day. Right. So it's people, that as a commissioner, that is probably the item that got me the most phone calls and complaints was when the roundabout went in on the business spur, which is an MDOT project. And since then, people have relaxed and said it's really good. It works well and smooths the traffic down. And we've had fewer accidents, critical accidents there. And yes, on this route, there will be two roundabouts, one at the Minneapolis intersection, the other one at Seymour. And they're a little bit smaller, obviously, than the business spur roundabout, but that's part of the engineered plan. Keep in mind that this is a state of Michigan truck route, so state of Michigan rules do apply to this. Also, we're going to be able to do all of the underground infrastructure that's needed in that area with the water, sewer, and separation too. So it's a win-win for us and for the taxpayers, because without the grant dollars, we certainly wouldn't have been able to embark on this project.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a big state grant for that too, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
partly
Both of
because it's
both
MDOT, right? It's a trunk road, so.
Right. So both of those projects covered by grant money. So really opportune time.
So one of those things that wasn't covered by grant money, and you know where I'm going, is $140,000 on a snowblower. Maybe we weren't really clear, both in my reporting and kind of how it came across to your commission over there, and what this is going to be used for. I thought Brian was pretty clear, but
Right.
so maybe a little bit of an explanation for our wonderful viewers and our wonderful people on that side of the
Sure.
border. What are
I-
we using this snowblower for?
I see you took a little heat in your post, so we'll try
Just
to
a
clarify a
little.
little bit. Sault Ste. Marie Department of Public Works certainly has an inventory of assets that we use for clearing our streets and for other road construction needs. So this one will have a primary use of our city airport, which is Sanderson Field. And as people know, I think they saw the information on there, the airport runway is plowed, but you must clear the banks on an airstrip. Otherwise, wingtips would be in danger. And the airport's heavily used for air ambulances and some other craft that come in, Homeland Security, Coast Guard, and others. So that'll be the primary use. And we only have one other snowblower in our inventory, and that's used to clear the snowbanks when you see people downtown, when we pull the snowbanks into the center and then we put it into trucks. So that's the item that's used. And snow blowers have a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of stuff that goes through them. So you do have the occasion that they break down. So that'll be a redundancy for the DPW so that they can continue to do what they do, which is clean up the streets for us.
So with COVID, like our two cities have sort of been separated. The bridge sees not nearly as much traffic as it normally would. How are you guys holding up on that side? Like we're stuck in a lockdown right now, so basically stay at home unless you got to work.
Right.
I don't know kind of what your stat is, but are you seeing any mental health issues on your side from this lockdown from some of your citizens?
Well, I think, you see there's a subtle movement right now. I think that people are starting to have a little bit of cabin fever, and I don't know if the warmer than usual winter is accounting for that. There's not as much outdoor activity, outdoor sports that you can do because we don't have the snow cover and we don't have the cold. And our sledding hill's not even open yet. And we have an indoor natural ice rink that we can't get open yet because the weather's been too warm. So I think that people are having difficulty with that. And like you, our restaurants have been closed by Michigan Department of Health and Human Services order. But there's some light at the end of the tunnel because, as you know, vaccines are out for some of us, and the healthcare workers are getting vaccines. And then we just got an email this morning from the state of Michigan that some of the restrictions will be lessened on February 1st. So our restaurants will be able to open at limited capacity with some other rules. So I think that all of our numbers are they're trending in the right direction, and the state of Michigan has lessened some of the restrictions. So I think that people can see there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Things are getting better, and hopefully that'll help with the mental health issues. It certainly has been a difficult year. It's been a very, very difficult year for our small businesses. And as you said, we miss our Canadian friends. I personally miss going over to Sault, Ontario, because we would go over 2-3 times a week. Our daughter plays hockey over there, so we've missed that immensely. And certainly we do benefit from retail trade from a larger partner in Sault, Ontario, but we understand the rationale. But I think things are getting back to a better status, and I think that things are starting to look good and open up, and we certainly hope the best for both Twin Saults going forward.
And like you said there, like you guys are getting to open up there beginning of February. I think we're still middle of February before they start to look at our lockdown, province-wide lockdown for our small businesses, et cetera. And where you guys are starting to see, and I heard it again in your commission meeting, where you guys are starting to see some COVID vaccines. We don't have any in our side yet. And
Okay.
It's looking like they're saying March, April before we get some up this way, even for our frontline workers. So what I'm thinking, like some of our frontline workers, and go over to your side, go over to and work at your hospital.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they'll probably be some of the first vaccinated people on this side of the border because of where they're employed, right? So like
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
aren't considered a provincial hotspot. So
Yeah, I do.
and
I do have a
that's
couple
how they're
friends
working
from
here.
Sioux, Ontario that work over here, and they have received both vaccinations from Pfizer. So they're safe as far as their transit back and forth to the healthcare facilities. And I think that I know that healthcare facilities are where people go when they get sick or when they have COVID, but they actually have practices in place that make them a much safer environment for those that are working there. So, I don't see any weakness from that. They're very well taken care of and very cautious.
You have any word on when your sled hill's going to open?
Our sledding hill?
Yeah.
Should be opening soon. We got a nice snow cover this week, as we all know. So I haven't seen the announcement yet, but we're hoping to get it open soon. There's a for free without the tow rope that's open all the time because people can just come and walk up and down. So there are some activities, and then there are some other bigger hills around town that people like to go to. So there's a lot of activity that's available. We have a cross-country ski trail in town too that's lighted and really is a nice trail. So that's been available. Snowmobile trails are available, and certainly outdoor activities are encouraged, especially during COVID and as long as people are practicing their safe distancing. So
thanks for joining me today, Don. Hopefully we can do this after every commission meeting where we sit down and talk about, especially if something controversial like a snowplow comes up. And I say that because it was a hot button issue. Like we're not laughing at the people that were, but I'm hoping that we were able to this will help bring some clarity to anything you guys are discussing about doing over there, because it does, that's part of the medium, right? To be able to have you come out and say, look, this is what we're thinking, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank you very much for your participation in getting your mayor to wear a U.S. Laker jersey. We got it to him, and I don't know if they had a meeting last week or if it's coming up.
No, it's Monday, so I'll hold them accountable.
Yes, please get a picture for me. And I'm wearing my Laker sweatshirt today because they go over to Michigan Tech this weekend to play. So good luck to our hockey team.
Thank you very much, Don. We'll talk with you again soon.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
These conversations with Don Gary are probably going to become a regular on the show as he discusses what happened at commission meetings the week before. We'll be back after these messages.